Hello, I'm Tom from TC Tiny and welcome to my series about how to make bushfire resistant tiny houses. In the past I've discussed how to construct the houses. I now want to focus on a very important aspect of them, which is how far away from the bush do you need to place them. The houses we're looking at just at the moment are a medium resistance based on the BAL 29 regulations. That's bushfire attack level 29. This house here is my current project. It's a BAL rating flame zone. It's intended to be much closer to the trees. You can see from this footage that I am surrounded by trees in my block here in Kinglake. This is the bush which burnt in 2009 on Black Saturday. You can still see the stags from the mountain ash which died on that day. And you can see that it's an incredibly dense forest. In a moment I'm going to go through how to prepare your property for bushfire and how to mitigate the risks. But I also want to talk about why Victoria specifically is a much worse place for bushfire than many other places around Australia and around the world. The first thing we're looking at is the eucalyptus leaves. They are flammable because in Australia even the trees are trying to kill you. Under heat it excretes the oil into the atmosphere, which is why a bushfire often looks like a series of small explosions. This is my block in Kinglake, which is now certified to meet the new vegetation management laws here in Victoria. And there are many reasons why it meets those expectations and why this is a very fire resistant block. But first we need to look at this problem more from a global perspective. We are in a very hot country. Australia is a very hot and specifically flat country, and it sits in a very windy part of the world. We are only just a few degrees north of the roaring 40s. To the northwest we have desert, and winds can come off that at up to 100 kilometers an hour and above 50 degrees. Coming from the southwest we also have ocean straight onto Melbourne landscape, which means there's nothing there to stop the wind at all, which is why it is a windy place and weather conditions do change very quickly here. It is a very unpredictable weather climate. If we zoom in a bit closer to Melbourne, we'll see how close Melbourne is to the bushland and how the urban sprawl is actually now meeting the mountain ranges. They're the Kinglake Ranges, the Yarra Ranges and the Dandenong Ranges. It's the end of the Great Dividing Range. This shot here encompasses the centre point for 4 out of Australia's worst 5 bushfires. That's Black Saturday, Ash Wednesday, Black Friday and Black Tuesday all happened, worst parts of those fires happened within this shot. Not far from Melbourne at all. We also have several places like this. This is my town. It's surrounded by bushland. And what appears to be a lot of openings, a lot of clearings, is generally farms. The houses are often nestled in between those, well and truly nestled into the trees. We're a plateau here in Kinglake. There is downslope on both sides. This is the Dandenong Ranges. To the west of it, there is flat land, nothing to stop the wind, and then it charges towards the Dandenong Ranges, which is the site for Ash Wednesday and a horrific fire back in the 80s. We also have several locations like this around the Victoria mountain ranges. You can see downslopes on either side, a township on the plateau and only one way in and out. It is often considered that a fire will attack from the north, the west or the south. It's not entirely true. Large fires do create their own weather and it is common for a bushfire to attack from the east prior to the main front. It is places like this which make Victoria a very dangerous place to be during a fire. Now bushland changes very much. Every piece of vegetation is different. Here we have what's known as managed woodland. You can see the grass has been nibbled down by horses. You can see the trunks. It is relatively free of undergrowth and the trees are tall. They are relatively mature as well. This is a less dangerous place than many other forests. Here we can see some of the undergrowth starting to meet with the canopy. Low-hanging branches are going to cause a hazard. It's the vegetation which is the source of radiant heat, which is therefore predictable as to the quantity and the direction of the radiant heat. Embers will travel in the direction of the wind. And here we can see where the managed woodland meets the unmanaged forest. These are mountain ash saplings, they're regrowing from '09. In the background you can see 70, 80 metre tall mountain ash trees. And we can also see wattles, but predominantly eucalyptus. This is of course the volatile component to the Australian bush. And there is no chance of a ground fire in this location. The ground fire instantly becomes a canopy fire as well. There are rumours that forest in Victoria can't burn after it's had a fire. This is not true at all. After only a year or two, it becomes almost fully flammable again. It is the eucalyptus leaf which is the volatile component, and the eucalyptus leaf comes back very, very quickly. You can see here this patch of bush is even made even worse by the slope of the land. Wind can force flames down to as low as 30 degrees from the horizontal, forcing it incredibly quickly across a sloping landscape. Some trees like this are on their own in paddocks are obviously less dangerous. They can ignite, but they don't cause the overwhelming radiant heat which causes a lot of problems. Here we have grassland and low-hanging branches. This is something to avoid. We can do that by trimming the low-hanging branches off the trunks and creating a gap between the grassland and the canopy. And here we can see how the grassland then becomes managed lawn or paddock as it moves up the hill towards the homestead. Some places are very difficult to manage. This is the side of a dam and it is neck deep. The flames of this could reach up to 10 meters high. It's important that this is a long way away from the homestead. If you are unable to manage the landscape effectively, then a scorched earth policy like this one might be effective. This is some lawn underneath some trees. We can see here that the bark, twigs, and the eucalyptus leaf has gathered up. This isn't too bad. What we're trying to avoid is a complete cover of leaf litter. The eucalyptus leaf remains flammable even when it's dead. So this here overall is a good example of how a homestead can be removed from the bush. It is obviously a long way in this instance, but that's because of the slope and the very dangerous location that I'm in at the top of a wooded plateau. Not all trees are flammable. Here we can see a selection of European trees, deciduous trees, and natives, which are the broadleaf green non-eucalyptus trees. Here we have a blackwood. If placed into a forest, of course, they would burn, but on their own, they're not considered flammable. They do go a long way to stopping embers and actually shading the house from radiant heat as well. Here we can see canopies not touching, they're 5 meters apart, which is dictated in the vegetation management laws now. And the branches have also been trimmed to more than 2 meters off the ground. This is mostly to allow easy lawn maintenance and to stop any grass fires igniting the canopy. Sometimes that's not possible. Shrubs, for instance, you can't mow underneath. As long as they're in a small section, 5 square meters is the recommended size for shrubbery. And this is what we're trying to avoid. It's not the plant that's become flammable, it's the grass within it. So the grass dies out and it becomes a very volatile mix. In a small space, that's okay. It's when it becomes a large garden that's an issue. So we have some European trees well managed under the bottom. Some fruit trees as well. They're a distance from the eucalyptus. They're just forming a bit of a buffer between the woodland and the homestead. These trees did burn in '09 and they still bear those marks. You can see the black on the trunk. Some of these trees do bear those scars a very long time. That bush actually affected this tree here, which is still struggling. Either the direct flame or the radiant heat from that woodland has affected the trees and burnt a branch which never recovered. It's now dead. In other areas, gravel base and heavy timber construction and moving a barbecue area or a decking away from the house is always a good idea. They do inevitably become fire risks, so connected to a house can be a problem. Water, designated firefighting water is a must. This is 20,000 litres and it's within close reach of the driveway and it's got a 2-inch connection to it. This is my fire resistant tiny house. It is not in its permanent location. This is where I build them from. And this is intended, it's been based on the Bale flame zone regulations. It can go in a much more risky position than where it is sitting currently. But it's designed to keep out radiant heat from the bushland around it, to keep the house cool. And you can see the size of the bush behind it towers over this tiny house, even though there's about a 20-meter buffer. That bushland typically could have a flame 2 or even 3 times its own height, depending on how well it's managed. You can imagine that towering over your house. It won't last long, but it will provide an extremely high level of radiant heat for a short period of time. We don't want that to infiltrate the house in any way. Beside the house there is a wooden fence. The wooden structure is not a hazard on its own. It would burn during a fire, but it would not produce radiant heat, which would be damaging. However, behind it is quite a steep grassy bank. The grassy bank here is the hazard, not the wooden fence. So hopefully I've explained why Victoria is such a dangerous place. It's the wind, it's the growing conditions as well, the undergrowth, the height of the vegetation, which is common throughout Victoria. We are also impacted on greatly by how close our houses are to the bushland. Of course, not every patch of bush is created equal. Some are enormous, some are tiny. Some might be surrounded by plains. Others, you may have a homestead which is surrounded by woodland. This is obviously worse. So how far away can a tiny house be from the bush to be considered safe? This is a medium rated tiny house. It's based on the BAL 29 regulations. That could be anywhere from 10 to 60 metres away from the bush, depending on the topography, depending on the woodland, depending on the vegetation and how it's managed. It could be 10 metres away from flat grassland. It could be 60 metres away from a steep forest. Other houses, like my flame zone tiny house, still needs managed bushland around it. You can't just let the forest regrow around and expect it to survive. You do need to manage the undergrowth and preferably have a clearing around your house. And it must be said that these houses are not intended as bushfire bunkers on wheels. They are intended to be there when you return from a fire. If you want more information about how I've constructed these houses to be as fire resistant as possible, there are many other videos about that I've produced regarding windows, doors, shutters, and the general construction of the house to keep out the heat, and the materials that I've used to do it. If you want more information about the bushfire, these houses are based on Australian standards for building bushfire resistant homes. There's also vegetation management laws are freely available. I do suggest anyone in Victoria understands this problem and understands their location. For me, understanding bushfire is the key to surviving it, not just individuals, not just houses, but also communities. I hope that's been a useful video. I'm Tom from TC Tiny. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe on your way out.